Dr. John, recently our clients have been coming to us after suffering ankle fractures. Is that serious?
Yes, ankle fractures can be serious injuries.
Are you qualified to discuss ankle fractures?
Yes, I'm qualified. I attended medical school and completed an orthopedic surgery residency and have actually treated a spectrum of ankle fractures, including their operative treatment.
Can you help us to understand the relevant anatomy so that we can understand ankle fractures?
Yes, in order to understand ankle fractures, let's take a look at the anatomy of the ankle. So this slide shows a diagram of the front part of the ankle as well as the side view of the ankle. And what we're looking at here is first the fibula and the tibial bones. The ankle itself is formed by the articulation between, or the joint between, the talus and the tibia and the fibula. And when we're talking about ankle fractures, the important subparts of the bones that we need to know are the lateral malleolus, the medial malleolus, and the posterior malleolus. Also important to understand, although they're not seen as well on an X-ray, are the ligaments that surround the ankle joint, represented by these structures.
What function does the ankle have in the human body?
So the ankle function is really to help support weight as well as in locomotion or ambulation, walking. So that when the ankle moves back and forth, it allows the body to propel forward during its motion.
For our clients who suffer ankle injuries, ankle fractures, what types of symptoms do you anticipate that they're going to experience?
So the types of symptoms that someone will experience regarding an ankle fracture depends on the extent of the ankle fracture. I'd like to show the next diagram to show how extensive an ankle fracture can occur, because there are a series of stages of different types of ankle fractures that are a part of the ankle fracture spectrum. So here we're looking at a view of the front of the ankle and then of the side of the ankle. Ankle fractures in general terms can be identified as to whether they're involved one malleolus, or one side of the subpart of the bone, or two parts of the ankle, or three parts of the ankle. So in turn, they can be called a lateral malleolar or unimalleolar fracture, or there can be a lateral and medial malleolus fracture, which is also called a bimalleolar fracture, bi meaning two. And then a three-part fracture can be the lateral malleolus, the medial malleolus, and the posterior malleolus, or trimalleolar fracture.
How do ankle fracture injuries occur?
So the mechanism of injuries with ankle fractures typically involves some kind of twisting motion of the ankle. There have been various classifications that help determine the mechanism of injury, but in general, if someone slips and then turns their ankle, if there's sufficient force with that turn and fall, then you can fracture different parts of the ankle.
How do ankle fractures generally get diagnosed?
So ankle fractures generally are diagnosed through a thorough history and physical examination, and then objectively, an X-ray is obtained to identify the fracture fragments or the fracture lines. So let's take a look at a typical ankle fracture X-ray that helps diagnose these injuries. So what we're looking at here is what's called our X-rays of the ankle that help us to identify where the fractures are. These X-rays have also been colorized to help you, the viewer, identify where the fractures are as well. So the actual ankle X-ray is located here where my arrow is pointing. Now this has been blown up along with some colorization to show the fracture. So in this case, we see a medial malleolar fracture. Here's one fragment of the medial malleolus. Here's a second fragment. And we also have a lateral malleolar fracture. Here you can see where the fracture goes all the way through here, and bits and pieces are even extended up to this area. If we then look at the side view of this ankle, here it is as the actual view, and then here it is with colorization. You can see here there's actually a posterior malleolus fracture. So in medical terms, we would call this a trimalleolar fracture because it involves three parts of the ankle fracture bone.
When we're looking at the three different levels of fractures, are those different grades of fractures, and do they end up with different levels of severity?
Yes, typically the higher the number of fracture fragments that are involved, meaning the medial and lateral malleolus, it creates what's called an unstable fracture, meaning the ankle can no longer bear its weight without even slipping out of place. So when things slip out of place, that's an indication for the surgeon to actually fix the fracture fragments with some kind of stabilization mechanism.
Who is the right type of medical provider to treat and diagnose an ankle fracture injury?
The right medical provider to treat ankle fractures, especially when they need operative intervention, is an orthopedic surgeon.
For our clients who suffer ankle fracture injuries, can you explain what types of treatments you can anticipate they're going to need over the course of care?
Well, I'll start with the lower or the less severe types of ankle fractures. Oftentimes, if there's no displacement or great movement of the fracture fragments, then sometimes they can be treated with a cast. But when we go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, where we have a trimalleolar or many bimalleolar fractures, you have what's called an unstable fracture, and operative intervention is likely the best. So what I want to show you next is an example of how operative intervention fixes the fracture fragments. What we're looking at here is an X-ray after the fractures have been fixed with plates and screws. What we're looking at first on the side view is the ankle where you can see the plate, and then you can make out the screw holes along with the screw heads, and then a long screw going through the medial malleolus. It's easier to see this on the front view of the ankle. And here you can see this is the fibula. Here on this side is the long plate, as well as the screws that hold the fracture fragment together. And then on the medial malleolar fragment, we have one long screw trying to reattach the broken pieces back to the tibia.
What kind of a procedure is that, Dr. John?
So that procedure is something called an open reduction and internal fixation. Open means that you actually make an incision so that you can go down and see the fracture fragments directly. You're actually looking at the pieces of the bone, and you can almost think of it like a jigsaw puzzle you're trying to put back together. The internal fixation refers to the plates and screws that are placed inside. And typically, those are used to hold the fracture fragments together in a very stable condition so that things don't slip out of place.
For our clients who suffer ankle fractures of different levels, what should they expect in the future? Are they going to continue to have problems into the future?
So their expectations in the future depends on the amount of damage that happens to the articular cartilage inside the ankle joint. So, and it's difficult to control how much damage that actually occurred during the initial injury. In these cases, the best chance to avoid what's called post-traumatic arthritis is to fix the ankle fracture fragments anatomically. If they're fixed anatomically, that gives the individual the best chance of healing as well as avoiding post-traumatic arthritis.
What do you mean by the word anatomically?
So anatomically means that when you put the fracture fragments together, they fit exactly as they were supposed to. In other words, just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fit exactly, that's another term for being anatomic. If, however, sometimes if the pieces are too small or the fragments don't fit absolutely perfectly, then it's not anatomic and there's a higher chance for residual injuries.
Thank you, Dr. John.